Welcome to Learning Python with Turtle, Lesson 8. In this video, we're going to explore how to define a process, which then we can use with our turtle. In doing so, we're going to write code that's in an external file and see how we can bring that code into our main program. So let's get to it. So if we wanted to draw a circle, we can use the command from the turtle, circle, and provide it a number, 50 for instance. And that draws a circle. Really nice. Now, if I wanted to draw a square, you might be tempted to do something like this. This would be nice. But you'll get an error message saying it doesn't know what square is. That's because if you go over to the Python turtle documentation, a lot of functionality is provided from the turtle, such as forward, right, left. And here we have the circle command, but you'll notice there aren't any other shapes. That's not to say that we can't draw a square. So for instance, if we did a for loop times in range 4, and simply do the bob.forward of 100, followed by bob.left of 90, there's your square. So the process exists to draw a square, but not as something that we can simply just call. Again, it'd be nice to simply say, draw a square, but that doesn't exist. Well, that's the goal behind today's lesson. How do we define a process and then have an ability to call that process? So in order to do that, we're going to create an additional file that's going to store these processes that we're going to create. So we're going to say myfunctions.py. Honestly, you can call the function whatever you want. I'm just calling it myfunctions. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to copy this over to this file. And let's just get rid of this for right now. And then in our main program, we're going to take this out. So we've essentially emptied out our main program. And we've transferred some of this code over to a separate file. Now, you're already familiar with the idea of the import turtle. This is how we're able to bring in all that additional code from Python into our program. Well, we're going to do something similar to that in that we're going to bring all the code that we've written in a separate file into our program. So from here, I'm going to do from my functions import everything. That's what the asterisk stands for, everything. And now what I can do is I can do a bob.forward of 100. This is just to prove to you that we can write code in another file, bring that code into our main program, and then use whatever's in there. So now what I'm going to do is, now let's actually get to how we can define a process. Now hopefully you've kind of picked up on the fact that I use the word define quite a bit here. That's because in order to define a process, we start off with the letters D, E, F. The next thing we have to do is we have to give that process a name. So we're trying to define a process called square. Now, when I say a process, again, it's code. So this is the name for that process, or more accurately, it's the name of the function. So while we're creating our functions, such as bob.circle, bob.forward, the usage is going to be a little bit different, but we're going to see that in a second. So we know that anytime we've used any of those commands, forward, circles, there's always a parenthesis at the end. So that's the same thing we're going to do here. We're going to put parentheses after the word square. And then similar to what we did with the for loop, in order to let Python know that we are done with that first line, we're going to put the colon. Also similar to the for loop, you'll notice that it's indented. That is how Python identifies when a piece of code belongs to another instruction, such as a for loop, or in this case, a function now. And now we're simply going to take that for loop that we created, that we know draws our function, and just put it inside of this function. So this square function now represents this process. let's take a look at how we can use this now. So now in our main program, I'm going to take this out, and I want to reiterate, this one line from my functions import asterisk brings in all this code. So it imports the turtle, it creates Bob, and it also brings in this additional function that we have created. So if I want to call that function, I'm simply going to write the word square. And what the program actually does is that it sees the name of the function square. It goes to that function and it executes that code. That is the power of a function, is that now we have encapsulated a process underneath a specific function name. Now, I could call square a couple of times, so we could do that. Let's do a for loop, 4 times in range 4. And let's just tab it in. So this will call the function 4 times. Now it's going to be kind of silly, but I want you to look at the screen. There's 1 square, 2 squares, 3 squares, and 4 squares. So it actually drew 4 squares. Now you might say, well, that's not very exciting. You're right, it's not. But now we can combine this idea with a for, let's say, left of 90. So every time it finishes drawing the square, it's going to turn left by 90. So now we essentially have a process called square that we can now use the way we would have liked to have used it. One thing to note, there's no Bob in front of the square. That's because this function wasn't created by the turtle. It wasn't created by Python. This function was created by us. We defined this process. So please do not put Bob in front of it. Bob has no sense of square. We saw that at the beginning. But it does understand square like this because that's the process we've created. Now, similar to when you work with for loops, if you want to get out of the function to perhaps create another function, you have to get back in line with the original code, because if not, you're still inside the function. So let's practice this again, and let's create a function called triangle. And if you allow me to do a little copy and paste here of the code, let's bring this back. So you have to be careful with indentations once you start working with functions. Notice the code is indented once to identify the process, but then the process itself has a for loop, which it also needs an indentation to identify that these 2 commands are part of the for loop, and then these 3 commands are part of the function. Again, with practice, you'll get used to this. So let's adjust this to a 3, a forward of 100, and this would be a left of 120. So now we've created 2 functions, one that does a square, one that does a triangle. So in our main program, we could do this now. I could draw a square followed by a triangle and then turn the 90. And again, there really is no end to the kind of functions you create. Now in this video, I'm showing examples of polygons, but just like in previous videos, we saw we don't have to restrict ourselves to drawing polygons. We can draw any pattern and then make that pattern into a function, which then we can use as part of our main program. All right, so let's go back to our presentation. Let's review what we've done. So in this video, we saw how we can define a function to represent a process that might not be available to us through the turtle, but that we know we can create. We saw how we can store code in an external file and then bring all that code into our main program. One of the benefits of doing that is that it keeps our main program cleaner in that we simply have to call the function which then executes the process. We let the work be done in that external file, and that way our main program becomes cleaner and more readable. So hopefully you're excited about creating functions, and enjoy.